This is Aresti Family 7, Loops and Eights. Family 7 is one of the most widely used group of figures in the Aresti system, appearing in all families except Family 9. A basic loop is often the first aerobatic maneuver attempted by novice pilots. As we'll discuss, there's a major difference between that first loop and one that is flown precisely. This family is quite large and we'll divide it into two parts. In the first part, we'll talk about the general rules that apply to all looping elements, and then begin to examine specific subfamilies. In the second part, we'll conclude looking at the remaining looping figures. Let's get into Family 7. Here is a small sample of looping types found here. As is apparent, loops aren't necessarily round figures, nor are they necessarily so-called closed figures. Some looping figures can have rolling elements added to the entry, exit, or integrated into the loop itself. They can be flown either upright or inverted, entered up or down, and are always wind corrected throughout, making this family quite versatile. Let's look at some general criteria that apply to all Family 7 figures. The size of the loop, large or small, as chosen by the pilot, is not a judging criteria. The radii of all loops, partial or whole, must be constant. When a radius change is observed, a 1-point deduction is applied. In figures where loop size or radii are required to be the same and they are not, a 1-point deduction per mismatch is applied. Here, the standard is shown by the red arrow and mismatches by blue arrows. If a roll element is placed on the entry or exit line of a figure, there can be no visible line between the loop and the roll. If a line is drawn, there is a minimum deduction of 2 points and may be zeroed at the discretion of the judges. While observing the track of the aircraft in the loop, any lateral displacement, sometimes called corkscrew, is penalized at 1/2 point per 5 degrees. Here are some half-loop figures commonly referred to as an Immelmann and a split S. As with common criteria, any lateral track deviations have deductions of 1/2 point per 5 degrees. For every radius change, the figure would be downgraded by 1 point. During the loop portion, if any roll displacement, not keeping the wings level, is observed, deduct 1/2 point per 5 degrees. If some portion of the loop doesn't have a radius, in other words a flat spot, then 1 point is deducted for each occurrence. When a roll is required, either before or after the loop portion, the roll and the loop must be distinct. The pilot may start an exit roll before the loop is completed, as in Figure 30, or in the case of an entry rolling element, start the loop before the roll is finished. In either case, judges should deduct 1/2 point per 5 degrees for the overlapping roll and loop. If there are lines drawn between looping and rolling elements, either on the entry or exit as shown in Figure 29, deduct a minimum of 2 points. Next is the 3/4 loop or goldfish. This figure consists of 3 partial loops connected with 2 45-degree lines. As shown in Figure 32, none of the radii in the figure have to match any of the others. The radii all must be smooth and constant and are subject to all of the common looping criteria. The overall length of the lines is not graded. The pilot may draw them as long or short as desired. Should there be rolls on the 45-degree lines, however, those rolls must be centered. Deductions range between 1 and 4 points, using Figure 14 in Rule 7.1 as a reference. The track of the 45-degree lines must be at the proper angle when compared to the true horizon, and is deducted at 1/2 point per 5 degrees. The next subfamily is the whole loops. This subfamily is further divided into 3 types, beginning with round loops. This loop figure is familiar to every pilot, aerobatic or not, but to perform it well is more challenging than might first appear. All of the common criteria apply here as with other looping subfamilies. The loop, when performed, must appear perfectly round from the judge's perspective. If the aircraft track drifts in or out relative to the line flown, there is a 1/2 point per 5 degree downgrade. The radius must be constant with no flat spots, 1 point per each radius change or flat spot. Rolls may be integrated into the loop and must be centered at the top or bottom of the loop as shown in Figure 2. 1/2 point per 5 degrees is deducted for rolls that are presented off-center. In addition to being centered, the roll must follow the curvature of the loop itself. If the roll is performed on a flat line, the minimum deduction is 2 points. The next subdivision of whole loops is the square, diamond, and octagon loops. While all common looping rules apply, there are several unique rules in this subdivision. This subgroup also contains partial loops of either 45 or 90 degrees. The radii for all the partial loops must be the same as indicated in Figure 39. The first partial loop sets the standard to which all the remaining partial loop radii must match. The interior lines are judged on proper track compared to the true horizon, and deductions are 1/2 point per 5 degrees. The length of the interior line segments must be equal, as indicated in Figure 39. The first interior line length sets the standard for the remaining lines. Deductions for each line length error range from 1 to 4 points, using Figure 14 in Rule 7.1 to determine the exact penalty. Rolls may also be present on interior lines, and if they are, the rolls must be centered on that line. Again, the deduction is 1 to 4 points, using Figure 14 in Rule 7.1 when not centered. The final subdivision of whole loops is the reversing whole loop, as shown in Figure 39A. This figure contains a 3/4 partial loop, followed immediately by a 1/4 partial loop. These are flown with constant radii, with the 1 point deduction per radius change noted. The radii of these 2 partial loops must be the same, and are penalized 1 point if they are different. Between the partial loops, there should be no line drawn. The penalty for such a line is 2 points. If there is a rolling element integrated into the loop, either top or bottom, the element must be centered on the loop. The deduction for offsetting the roll element is 1/2 point per 5 degrees. The integrated rolling element must also be drawn in the radius of the loop. 2 points are deducted if drawn on a line. Finally, rolling elements could be placed on the entry line, exit line, or both. If present, there can be no line drawn between the element and the looping portion. A 2-point deduction is applied if a line is drawn. This concludes Part 1 of Family 7, Loops and Eights. For more information, log on to mini-iac.com or arrestisystem.com.